Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We're here at GearFest 2011, and I am joined by electronic artist BT. Thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it. It's good to see you again.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So let's talk a little bit about how you got to where you're at. Now, you grew up in the D.C. area.
I did, yeah. I grew up in D.C. and I was a classical music brat, so I was one of those kids that I gravitated towards the study of music really, really early. And in fact, before I actually had the physical attributes necessary to play an instrument. So both of my parents were doctors. They were terrified that their son had this sort of musical proclivity. I studied piano and composition in D.C. at the Washington Conservatory of Music, and then eventually went on to study at Berklee School of Music. I went there when I was 15, and I left school early to do it. And so I did kind of jazz and classical stuff, at an early age. But I was always interested in electronics, and I actually had like a lawn mowing monopoly in Maryland when I was growing up to buy my first synths and drum machines and samplers and stuff, and really gravitated towards English, English electronic music, and some of the German stuff as well too. And so I became really interested in both, electronics and technology and coding. I learned how to program in Basic A and Cobalt Fortran when I was a kid, and music. And so my parents really didn't know what to do with me. And I went off to Berkeley. I studied, and I moved to Los Angeles and began.
Right.
So.
Right. How do you think that early education and your classical influence, if you will, how do you think that's translated over into the electronica?
When I began, electronic music was this very sort of static, linear type of music. And I remember some of the first records that I made when I signed to Warner Brothers in England in the early 90s. People would listen to my records and they'd say, oh, you can't have this music, this minute and a half where there's no beats. It just doesn't do that, Right. And so I think that the classical stuff that I studied as a kid brought this sense of dynamic to electronic music that didn't previously exist in it, and actually was really, at the moment it happened, pretty controversial and unaccepted, initially to start with. Right. And then also too, just all the classical stuff has influenced my chord voicings and thirds in the bass and contrapuntal writing and all of that kind of stuff too, in the way that I write and think harmonically and melodically, which is dissimilar to a lot of the things that happen typically in electronic music, which is a lot of which, and even some of the best stuff, is very sort of pedal tone driven, so yeah, they definitely influence my work for sure. And then you can really hear it on my scores. Sure. So when I'm writing for orchestra and stuff. So. Right.
Now you did some early collaborations with Deep Dish.
Yeah,
you were involved in progressive house and trance. And can you talk a little bit about that era and the kind of things you were doing?
Yeah, sure. Ali, it's funny, we were talking about Ali this morning at breakfast. Ali from Deep Dish was a high school friend of mine, and we've known each other since we were kids, and in fact before he even spoke English. So I actually speak a frightening amount of Farsi, which is really fun at cocktail parties or coffee shops to freak people out, and go, Salam chatori khubi. They're like, whoa, what are you talking about? But anyway, he was one of my closest friends growing up, and he wanted to start a dance music label. I wanted to put out a record, and we literally sold our clunker cars, for $2,000 each, pooled our money, and got an amazing engineer named Stephen Barkin, who I still can't believe did this at the time that he did, who was mixing records for David Morales and Roger Sanchez and these guys, Masters at Work and all those kind of guys. He came down to DC for the weekend, and we locked ourselves in Omega Studios, and we made my first record, which was the first thing Deep Dish ever put out. Wow. And Larry Flick from Billboard magazine wrote about it, and he wrote this beautiful, glowing single paragraph about that record, and encouraged all of us to continue at what we were pursuing. And eventually Deep Dish grew to be this you know, incredible thing, and I went off and have had my career as well too. So it was a really incredible kind of homegrown thing, you know, that we did.
That's very cool.
So
very cool. Yeah, you've collaborated with a variety of artists through the years as well. Tori Amos, David Bowie, Peter Gabriel, Tiesto. Can you talk a little bit about some of those collaborations, how those came to be, and the kind of things that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, not being in a band, as it were, that's really my way of being in a band.
Okay.
You know, is to collaborate with other artists. And you know, it's funny. You know, people will often say to me, "Oh, well, you sing. You know, why don't you sing, you know, everything on your album?" And it's because I really enjoy working with, you know, peers and having that kind of you know, interaction that you have in a band scenario. You know, I don't get that on a normal day-to-day basis. So collaborating is my way of doing that. So, and these things always happen organically. You know, I've had many moments where a record label has tried to put me together with such and such artist. Just like, not so much. You know what I mean? It always happens through friends of friends. And then evolves into something, you know, that works, because when you meet someone through the right kind of point of connection, it seems fortuitous, and you end up doing something that's meaningful. So all of those things that you mentioned have been, you know, incredibly enriching musically, and I've learned from working with people like that. You know, I was just recently telling somebody about, you know, it's so cool sitting in a room like this where there's a console. It's so rare to see something like that these days, and I just thinking recently about, you know, some of the people that are coming up recently and how everything is centralized in a computer, which is awesome because it's portable, but there's also there's pieces that are missing because of that, you know, that can be very important depending on what sort of source material you're working with. So recently I was explaining to someone the last time I was at Real World and watching John Leckie miking things, and how much I learned from the experience of watching him doing, you know, mixed phase pattern miking and some of those kind of things. And so it's, you know, I've learned these incredible things from all those interactions with different artists.
With a master like John and you know, people like that, you can always learn something
in an hour, you know. And the cool thing is I got to share some things with him too, that, you know, twisted him 1 degree sideways too. That's really interesting. So, you know, it's cool. You have that generational thing where you get to share with, you know, so it's pretty awesome. You know, it's a great part of my job. I love doing that.
Now, for many years, you resisted the label DJ. And I think you even had T-shirts at one time that said, "I'm not a DJ."
Yeah, my fans made me T-shirts that said that.
What was your resistance to that? And you actually put a band together and did some live things, didn't you?
Oh yeah, we've done it many times now. We went out for This Binary Universe, and we went out for 2 of my albums before that too, as a full live band. You know, it's not really a resistance. It's just a partial description of what I do when I'm performing alone.
I see.
And so. And also too, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the craft of DJing, which is actually a widely acknowledged craft now. You know, it's not somebody just putting 2 records together and beat mixing them together. There's a lot of skill that goes into that, and it's never been what I've done. You know, prior to switching over, transitioning into performing with a laptop, you know, I was traveling with, you know, a tour manager, a lighting guy, and, you know, 15 bags filled with synthesizers and drum machines. And really, I just had the ability to do what I was doing then inside a laptop and several USB controllers. So, and I think that there's, you know, there's a group of us that are doing this sort of thing that's really not DJing. You know, another person that comes to mind is Deadmau5. You know, you know, people look at Joel as a DJ. He's not a DJ at all. He's really not. He's not DJing. You know. What we're doing is much more akin to something like someone like a King Tubby, where you know, it's like a you know, it's like a how would you describe it? Like a dub sound system, you know, where people used to bring, you know, echoplexes and plate reverbs and stuff on stage with an 8-track master and do these live remixed versions of their own music, of other people's music. That's much closer to what it is that we're doing. So the resistance hasn't been, for, on my part at least, any other reason than it's a partial
Just not accurate.
descriptor, yeah, you know, of what it is that we're doing.
Right.
And now too, with the tools that we have available, it's insane what's actually happening inside you know, a single computer on stage. So and honestly too, you know, for doing this for the last 10 years and using a laptop performing, it really was the spark that necessitated stutter edit. I needed that, you know, so I needed to be able to do those kind of buffer cutting techniques live, and so it started as a, you know, a C-sound score and orchestra, and it grew into a max patch, and eventually grew into 3 of us sitting on my couch slinging C++, and then, you know, a couple 100,000 lines of code later, you know, I decided I didn't want to do tech support. I partnered with my, you know, with a really close group of friends of mine who are the Isotope folks, and we put it out, and it needed to happen. I needed it to perform with, you know. So I built something that was fine, that was serviceable for using in the studio, but you know, something that's robust and operates on multiple operating systems and in, you know, a high stress environment, which is performance.
Sure.
You know?
It's friendly, it's ergonomic.
Yeah.